Welcome everybody, this is Justin Whiting. I'm the social media intern here for the AACE organization, and today I'm going to have a little conversation with Priscilla Norton and Hathaway, both of the Learning Technologies group at George Mason University. And they were some of the winners. They had a Best Paper Award winner at the eLearn conference in 2014. So today we're going to talk a little bit about them. A really interesting paper here, and talking about design patterns and how they can be used for instructional designers and in our design. So first of all, thank you for joining me. Glad to have you back. To start off, I wanted to ask, just a little bit about the conference in general, and then we'll get to a little bit more about your paper in just a second. I guess the first question is, how did you decide? What was your process in selecting conferences? Why did you feel that this would be a good fit for the eLearn conference?
Well, we don't target conferences that we attend regularly so much, but we have pretty regularly attended the site conference. But for the most part, we look at the work and then choose a conference setting where the work is appropriate. And this particular paper deals with the notion of design and a process for design and a unique design problem. And eLearn seemed the best venue for that, in that it had a more general audience beyond teacher educators and technology. And the work seemed appropriate for that venue.
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned that a little bit. That I like that you mentioned that the audience seemed a little bit more broad. You'd mentioned you've gone to site many times in the past, but you were hoping that this work could reach a little broader audience. Is that correct?
That's right.
Excellent. And let me, again, congratulations on winning the Best Paper Award. Could you provide a brief summary of the impact of your paper, the overall summary of your research paper there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll do it. The paper is really the story of the intersection of two problems that we face as designers of opportunities for teachers to learn about technology. Those problems center on the notion of a design process, how to structure design. And the literature is clear that design is not a linear, really structured process, but what was a framework or an approach that we could use to solving a design problem, coupled with the problem that we recognize in the area of structuring content in online environments. The literature is full of chunk it,
put it in modules,
have good discussion groups, whatever. But it doesn't really talk about how to think about your content and to structure it in a way that it leads to the kinds of learning goals that you have in mind. So we put them together and solve the problem and share the story in two different domains of how we came to structure content in those environments, and to use the design pattern approach as a vehicle for thinking through how that might happen. The literature on design patterns really talks about it most as a way to express, document, and share the outcomes of design. But we have found in our work that it also becomes a process for facilitating design. That by asking the kinds of questions that the expression of a design pattern suggests, also facilitates the design process.
So I'm really curious to hear a little bit more on this. If you were to explain, kind of the key differences between using these pattern frameworks versus simply what we would generally refer to as instructional design, what are the major takeaways? What are the major advantages of following a design or a pattern framework?
Well, I think number one is that a design pattern approach asks you to think of your design problem not as unique, situated in your particular domain, but to think of it as a repeatable pattern that applies to multiple domains where you can identify a similar problem.
So it required us to step away from our unique problem, the specifics of it, and look to other disciplines or other contents that might not have any relationship with ours, but have the same kind of problem of practice. And, to look at those and see how we can develop something that actually isn't just a unique solution for us, but could be a solution for those other.
So repeatable design structure is what you invent.
Yeah, recurring.
And step one is really getting at what is your, I use the phrase, what is your real design problem? And your real design problem isn't to design a course about X. It is what is the challenge of that particular domain of knowledge. And I guess an example probably would work best. Instead of saying I want to teach a course that promotes learning about the principles of technology integration, if you step back and look at the real design problem, it's really how do I teach particular concepts and their application to a range of situations. So one might take an assessment course and teach about portfolios and objective tests and formative and summative, but then how do those look in the real problem is then to take first to learn those concepts and then to talk about what do they look like in a kindergarten classroom, what do they look like in an 8th grade classroom, what do they look like in a graduate program, or to do the same thing with the shared problems, special ed, categories of disabilities, kinds of adaptations, the IEP process, teach those as generic concepts, but then how do they get turned into kindergarten practice or 5th grade practice or high school practice? And so a design pattern pushes you to look at the design problem not as situated in your particular need, but as part of a category of instructional problems.
Great. Yeah, I believe in our conversations you had mentioned an example of, I forget if it was a student or a faculty that was developing a course or going through creating their pattern, and then ultimately said they weren't going to teach that course, and asked the question if they could use the same pattern for a different course.
Yeah,
Can you talk more to that?
We had asked students to create designs for units that they would be teaching in their practice. And the unit that this student designed really addressed science content, but she discovered that she wasn't going to be able to teach it in the time frame that she wanted. And so she asked if she could take the same pattern and teach social studies content. And when we told her yes, she emailed back and said, yeah, I've come to understand that a good design structure can be used for multiple contents as long as the design problem, the learning goal, remains constant.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really a neat thing you've touched on here, bringing in experiences from other fields, and I think a lot of times, and certainly not just in education, but any number of fields, we get stuck in our own worlds and we forget to learn from examples and patterns that have come from other fields and other departments as well. You had mentioned, other fields using design pattern, practices such as architecture or other fields like that. Can you talk more to that for just a minute?
Well, that's how the idea came when we have, the problem of how to structure content. And it's not just how to, put this activity here or how to put this activity there, which is what we mostly have in the literature, but to organize those and structure those in a way that provides the right kinds of thinking at the right kinds of places to solve that problem that we have. And it comes from architecture, from computer science and web publishing. Mm-hmm. They all use design patterns. And when we looked at that and saw that there's this framework, as Priscilla mentioned, usually it's used to, share the outcomes, but we decided to use it as an analytical strategy to really think through each of the steps of the design pattern to give us some answers. And it worked really well that we tried it in one course, then we tried it in designing a bigger course, and
now we've integrated it into teaching that approach to our own graduate students.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting piece, and that kind of gets at the ideal from conducting research is that we then put it into practice as well. So I'm really interested to hear more about that. Of how are you actually in your center there? How are you encouraging instructors to follow this pattern? How have you fully integrated this in your work there?
Well, we haven't really gotten to the instructor part, because right now all we can do is inform our own context, which is practicing K-12 teachers. That's who we work with, and we're hoping by through an agenda of research that really follows this, using patterns, developing other kinds of patterns, and then studying their impacts. What are the impacts of our decisions? I think we mentioned before that our site paper is about how do students react to those decisions we've made from using the design pattern approach, and to follow that, because it worked once, but is it repeatable? So
right. And we've taken our experiences and our understanding of the approach and kind of made it an underlying theme of our work with graduate teachers. In other words, to say to a teacher, you're experts at planning, that's what you've been all about, but we want to help you re-identify yourself as a designer, and to learn to step away and think about teaching and learning as bounded by a design that you then plan its implementation. And so we're really working with teachers to get them to rethink what it is they do, which then allows them to see how technology is an essential and natural part of the design of learning opportunities for students, not an add-on or a separate topic. All right.
I wonder if you could explain just a little bit more. You kind of mentioned this about your current research agenda and building that out. What are the next steps for continuing this research?
Well, as I mentioned, our site paper takes an instance of what Priscilla mentioned before, how do we teach others and teachers how to integrate know the concepts of technology integration in their specific disciplines. And we've taken that research and actually added on. We follow a design-based research approach. We look at the literature, we design something, we study it. Right now we're at the design decisions, the decisions we've made based on that pattern, and what were the students' perspectives, and how did it impact them. And then our next step is to move to outcomes. What are their attitudes and beliefs, and based on those design decisions, and using that design pattern. And then our research agenda really follows two strands. One is to continue to use the design pattern approach to design instruction, and to then, using a design-based research approach, look at the impacts of those patterns, so that when we say here is a pattern that we invented using the design pattern approach, we can follow up with, and here's how it impacted students, and here's how it got refined. The second agenda then is to look at how do we communicate that to teachers, how do they adopt it as part of their identity, how did they implement it in their classrooms.
Great. I think kind of maybe one of the final pieces here, one of the final questions is, I know at the end of your paper you kind of mention kind of 4 steps for looking to do this, or 4 kind of takeaways there. What would you recommend if somebody's really interested in trying this out? How would they start and find out more about using these design pattern approach?
Well, we have a series of papers. Some of them we reference in this one, and then add this one, and then the site paper. But I'd also send them to, we have a paper in Educational Technology magazine, which really tells the history and the anchors that come from other disciplines. And that bibliography takes you to a whole lot about design patterns. And third, contact us.
Great. Yeah, well, we will provide your contact information for anyone that wants to get in contact with you. I really appreciate meeting with you and talking about this. I think this is a really neat approach, especially for online learning, but other aspects of teaching as well. Any final thoughts about your experience at the eLearn conference and presenting this paper that you'd like to share with others?
It was quite an honor to win the award. To validate our work that we believe is really important, a breakthrough really in structuring content. But it was a really, I wouldn't say it was a totally different experience than when we go to site, but it was an experience where we got to mingle with people that were not teacher educators. As a matter of fact, we were standing by the elevator, and a computer science guy, came up and said, "Oh, I can't believe you brought in design patterns into this," something that they're familiar with, and how we connected different kinds of disciplines together. So it was interesting.
It was a good experience to be with instructional designers beyond those that are interested in teacher education specifically.
It was kind of, once again, stepping outside of our field and seeing what's out there, which I think you have to do, because you can't stay within your field all the time and find the answers.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Norton, Dr. Hathaway, I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. We will hopefully get a lot of good feedback from this as we share this video out on our blog, and we wish you the best success and look for more of your work in the future. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Justin. Thank you.